Welcome to the Co-Creators Podcast. I'm Chloe Anderson.
And I'm Lakita Williams, and we help leaders and organizations build the future of work.
Hello, co-creators, and welcome back to the Co-Create Work podcast. We have a special episode for you today as part of our AI Workplace and Culture series. And I am so thrilled about our guest today. Dr. Wendy Smith is the Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management at the University of Delaware's Lerner College of Business and Economics. She is also a recent recipient of the University of Delaware's highest faculty honor, the Francis Allison Award. This is awarded annually to the faculty member who best embodies the ideal of scholar and teacher. And I think you're going to hear that come through today as she shares so much knowledge and information and teaches us some really useful tools and skills and approaches to AI through the lens of paradox thinking. Her full bio is in our show notes, but a few highlights. As a leading expert in paradox thinking, her work helps leaders and organizations thrive by embracing competing demands and navigating complexity effectively. She's also the co-author of Both and Thinking, Embracing Creative Tensions to Solve Your Toughest Problems. And with that, let's go ahead and jump in.
So, Wendy, thank you again for being here. I'm so, as I have probably said a million times, excited about this conversation, just because I think it was going to be so valuable. And I also know that folks are going to walk away with tools that they can use immediately in their decision making as well.
I'm so glad to be here and ready to dive in for some of those tools. I need some of them too.
Thank you. Definitely from a both and perspective. So I love that.
Yes,
So I want to open the conversation by asking you to respond to a post that I came across online. So I'm going to read that to you and then ask you a question. So someone posted, it was Samantha Writes. She said, it's so hard to talk about AI because the people who love it don't want to talk about its limitations and harms. And the people who hate it don't want to talk about its merits and benefits. I'm truly somewhere in the middle, and it's tough out here, especially in a world / internet that demands we pick a side. So, what does your work on paradox and both and thinking have to say to somebody who is in this space?
Well, let's jump right into the deep end. I love that question. I am so empathetic to Samantha. I am so empathetic to the people who are experiencing that tension of AI and want to just pause and look at the structure of how we think about the problem to begin with. So let's just name AI is really challenging. It is emotionally hard. It feels threatening. It feels anxiety provoking. It also feels opportunistic. There's possibility out there. And just noticing how Samantha has framed this, we tend to take sides. We either love it or we hate it. And so let's just start with asking the question, can we do both of those? Can we indeed feel anxious and fearful and worry about where this is all going, and at the same time excited to play with AI and learn more about it and see the possibilities? And that's where the research that I do and this idea of paradox invites us to go.
Yeah. And why do you think so? Even I think in asking the question, as you were asking us those questions, like, can we do both? I'm like, I land on a side. And I imagine people who are listening are their first instinct is like, probably not, because this is so big or it's so consequential. How do we even begin to like just accept the idea to question ourselves and how we're thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question is, why do we have to land on one side? Can we make space for both?
Mm,
That's true in a lot of the things we experience. Can we make space at work to both love the work we do and feel frustrated by the experience of the people around us or the bureaucracy or whatever else it is? Can we make space to, as a leader, want to be helping and supportive and talk about people's well-being and at the same time need outcomes and want productivity? Why is it that, and so I think this is the question that you're asking. Why is it that we feel like we have to land in one place in each of these types of questions or tensions? That's the core of the work, right? Which is we experience these either or tensions. The issue is not if we experience them, but how and why we have to frame them as an either or. And we can certainly step back and look at some of the research about why we tend to frame them as an either or. The
Mm.
invitation is to notice the either or, ask why we're framing it that way, and see what possibility lies if we shift the way we think about our tensions, problems, issues, competing demands, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, I love that. I'm curious if just a little bit, like, could you share a little bit of the research
Yeah.
about why that comes up as the natural thing? And I'm also like, are we seeing that more with social media as well?
Hmm.
Like it seems to me to
Hmm.
be very black or white online in
Hmm.
particular.
Well, the first thing I would do, if anybody is listening, is to invite them to stop and think about a problem or an issue or a tension that you are experiencing right now. Whether that's a tension in your career, do I want to continue to do this X, Y, and Z, or do I want to switch into something else? Whether it's a tension in your leadership, do I want to lead, being more people oriented or more process oriented? Whether that's a tension in strategy, do I want my strategy to go deep in some way or to be more broad? Or so just notice those tensions. So that's the first thing I would do is invite people to think about those tensions. And then I would invite people to notice that even in the way I framed each of those issues or challenges, the or was stuck in the middle there. So
Mm,
the first thing to notice is that this is just societally how we tend to frame our questions or issues. It's partially a function of just an evolutionary bias that we have. We know from our research that it's a bias that has emerged particularly in Western society much more than in Eastern society because of, we can go deep into this, but starting with Greek philosophers and then moving into the Enlightenment, the assumption is that we have to figure out the truth in the world, and the
mm,
truth with a capital T means that if we have these opposing ideas, they can't coincide and occur simultaneously. We can't hold them simultaneously. It's partially a function of the fact that we have this psychological consistency bias. If we did something in the past, if we identified with something in the past, we feel like we have to have this consistency to keep doing it and doing it again in the future. That's particularly true if we think about our identities. If I have been a really good team player and that's my identity as being a team player, then when I become the leader, it's really hard for me to think about doing something that might not be people pleasing and team oriented and make a decision that has to be harsh in some way. So that consistency bias, by the way, we see that consistency bias in our leaders, our political leaders. If our leaders make one decision that makes sense and is right for a particular moment and then changes, we call them flip-floppers. We
Flip-flopper.
call them, like, we don't like that. So we don't like
yeah.
that consistent. We want that consistency in ourselves. We want it in others. Uh, all the work on cognitive dissonance, if people have heard that term in psychology, is about how we need to be consistent or the pressure to be consistent in our actions and in our beliefs. So there's this consistency bias. There's
Yeah.
this lack of change bias. There's this evolutionary bias of trying to find truth with a capital T, all of which leads us into thinking that black and white thinking and either or thinking is more scientific, it's more critical, and it's more analytical, it's more effective. All of this leads us into this kind of or thinking. It's all
Mm,
very good or thinking to make clear decisions. It's not very good to deal with the kind of complexity that we're dealing with in the world today.
yeah.
One of the things that I noticed just for myself, like deconstructing from a very high demand religion, was like there's so much bias to like that
Yeah.
capital T truth and the black and white thinking. So a big part of my own process, like in therapy, was to stop saying but and to start using and to start getting
Yeah.
into a space of like everything is a lot more complex than we think it is. And we need to
Yeah.
take the time to sit in that complexity. And I feel
Yeah.
like
And
AI is there.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, Chloe, I just want to unpack three things that you just said. First of all, religion does tend in many religions to, I mean, and here's the irony. Or the way most of us experience religion does tend to have this black and white, right or wrong bias in
Mm,
terms of trying to construct and define how we should behave. Most religions, as you get into the depths of of the philosophy actually tend to be much more weighting in the complexity of reality. Good and evil go together. I mean, and I have colleagues who have studied this in Christianity, in Judaism, and like all this sort of Judeo-Christian beliefs, in Islam, certainly in Eastern philosophies, where if you do one level deeper, what you see is that there is this assumption that the world has a deeper level of holding this and that in relationship, this and its opposite, good and evil, love and hate, in these beautiful ways. The if anybody has seen our book or reads our book, the very last quote that we put into this book is a quote by Mary Morrison that she wrote in the Episcopalian years and years ago about the sparks of light that go out into the world by holding polarities. So there is something deeply spiritual, if you
Mm.
will, about holding both and leaning into that kind of complexity. And that's also a little bit scary in the workplace. We like to stamp that out of the workplace and look for simplicity. But
Totally.
if you do that level deeper, you'll find it really easily.
Yeah, I love that. I really got a chill when you said that too, Wendy, and it made me think about that seems more deeply human than choosing like either black or white thinking that
Yeah.
we kind of hold the capacity for many things, many thoughts, and ways and approaches to think about problems, teams, but it is harder. So,
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, you'll tell us whether that's
Yeah.
right. Is it more challenging, and how do people kind of get themselves ready for the challenge of both and thinking, nuance thinking in the age of artificial intelligence?
I would say it is more challenging at the beginning. It's one of these things that enables us to lead to more possibility and openness that diminishes the challenge over time. I like to
Mm,
think of both and thinking. The metaphor I often use is meditating.
mm,
Meditating can be really hard at the beginning, but sitting with the practice of holding, uh, quiet, holding, keeping open space, letting go of thoughts over time creates this openness that actually enables so much more to emerge that the challenge sort of floats away. I think that's true with both and thinking. The invitation, as I said, is to start by noticing the or and inviting us to change the question and hear the and. So that might look like, what does it mean to be a leader who is both looking for well-being and team connection
mhm,
and supporting people and expectation and performance and outcomes and not just hold those side by side, but see how you can create conditions where they enable one another. Because what we know from the research is that the more people feel productive, for example, and the more they feel like they can contribute, and the more they feel like they're engaged in effective work, the more that they feel supported and the more that they feel like their well-being rises. And so while at some level it feels like these are in conflict with each other because am I going to create a team where I'm going to give people time off or I'm going to make them get stuff done? What we know is that over time they enable both to rise. That's hard to do in the beginning. I think that as we build this muscle, it actually makes the world so much easier to engage with because we're not constantly fighting to try and assert one point of view. We're dealing with new creative possibilities for how we can
mhm,
hold the complexity.
mm. Yeah, the not constantly fighting, I think is something me and Chloe hear a lot
Yeah.
about. Like as a
Yeah.
company, we hear a lot from leaders feeling like I think the conversations come up of like, I need to quote, force my team to use AI, or my
Yeah.
team is against AI, and
Yeah.
anti like using it. And they don't know how to explain why it would be helpful. Why is it a tool that people should think about,
Yeah.
particularly when there is, some of the science that says that AI is having a really negative impact on the environment. I'm curious, like, how would
Yeah.
you support leaders to think about that and what conversations they might have?
I love that. I mean, I have a couple of reactions. I'm really curious how you guys are holding this.
Hmm.
The AI as possible, the AI as killing our universe. And what are you seeing with leaders?
Yeah, I think, well, one of the things that we did is we had a few previous episodes about artificial intelligence, and we had an environmentalist come in. We had someone come in who is from the social services industry. And so I think one of the things we tend to do is get more information and be able to say, like, here are strengths and here are weaknesses, here are opportunities. I think as a company, and Chloe, I would love your thoughts about this. We tend to approach things from what's possible, like a really big like possibility thinking. So if this
Yeah.
represents an opportunity, how can we find and identify that opportunity? How can we share that with clients? And if there are downsides, that we have a part to play in how we address those and how we can make them meet in the middle.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think also similar to like we view friction as useful, right? Friction is not a
Mhm.
bad thing, it's useful. Tension between those two is useful, right? There's some value in there and it allows you to really explore why are we resistant? Why do we want to use it? What are we using it for? Is it, and really being thoughtful about the questions we're
Yeah.
asking when we're talking to leaders about this. So that's one of the things that I tend to do is like, what is your goal with using AI? Because I think even just starting there and people understanding what am I trying to get after can really help with navigating and landing more in that both and space rather than the
Yeah.
like, everyone's using it, we're using AI for everything, everyone needs to use it, or we're not touching it, it's not worth it, both of those pieces. So I think really asking those questions initially around like
Yeah.
what's your goal with using AI?
Yeah, it makes me think, and I would love your thoughts on this, Wendy. I appreciate that so much, Chloe, because I'm like, okay, and what is at the core of it? And this is something we talk to leaders about, like, why do you feel like everyone needs to get on AI? And a lot of times the thought is we have to move fast. If we don't move fast, we'll get left behind. So
Yeah.
fear is often at the bottom of it. Is that something that you see as a driving force for Black and white
Yeah.
thinking versus being able to take a broader approach as people go along?
Yes. There's so much that you both just said that I just want to elevate and bring the research
Yeah.
to underscore. First of all, Lakita, I know you and I have had conversations where you are someone who invites people to live into the win-win, into the more expansive space and what that looks like emotionally. So I just
Mhm.
want to say yes to all that and bring some very specific practices of things that you guys have said that does bear out in the research. The first piece is the invitation to frame tensions as neutral and as opportunities, not necessarily as detrimental. We hear the word tension, we hear the word conflict, we want to run because we think it's so problematic, because it tends to become problematic because it's not dealt with properly.
Yes, yes.
And I'm a big fan of work by Mary Parker Follett. She's brilliant. She wrote in the early 1900s, and she had this great image that tension or conflict or friction is what enables possibility. So she talks about it's the tension between the bow and the violin that creates music. It's the
Mm.
friction between the car tires and the road that enables the car to move forward. And one of the greatest leaders that we had interviewed for our book was Paul Pullman, who talked about how valuable he was the CEO of Unilever during the heyday of Unilever's sustainability advances in that from 2009 to 2019. He told us, look, I know these tensions exist. If they go underground, we both don't value them, but also they create all these problems. How do we
Yes.
surface them? Meaning, very specifically, he would ask in his senior leadership meetings, tell me what tensions are bubbling up, particularly in his world around sustainability or around innovation. What are the tensions that are bubbling up around AI? Let's talk about them. So let's
Mhm.
rephrase tension from a problem or the conflicts that are emerging about AI from a problem that where we're gonna be in this detrimental conflict between the environmentalists and the futurists innovators, or between the enthusiasts and the resistors. And let's put it on the table in a way that we can talk about it. That's number one. I want to
Mhm.
just say two more things that you both named and lift up, or five. I mean, there was so much in what you said. The second thing is that there's all this research about the role that the leader can play in setting what we name as the overarching vision or the like greater purpose statement or the greater meaning statement. Like, what's the higher vision? Why are we doing this? And how does that encompass these competing ideas?
Yeah.
AI is not going away. So
Mm.
if we turn and stick our heads in the sand like ostriches, we're not creating the conditions where we're able to effectively manage this. But if we overextend too quickly and too fast without regulation, without limitation, without consideration, then that kind of behavior is probably going to be really detrimental to how we unleash this. So, how do we hold AI in seeing the possibilities for the future and at the same time knowing that we've got to be restrictive? And how do we frame a bigger goal around that, a bigger vision for impact on our world, impact on people, impact that
Mhm.
enables us to hold both of those together? So the bigger vision. And then the third, there's sort of two more pieces that really struck me in what you said, and I want to just say them briefly. It strikes me what we know is that people tend to be really committed to their roles. So if
Yeah.
I'm the environmentalist, I'm going to resist. If I'm the
Yes.
futurist, I'm going to support and advance. Can we help people notice their roles? Can we value what they bring to the table? Can we talk about it as separating and connecting? Can we
Mm.
create the conditions where we hear and value? This is the separate part, each of the different roles that people have, but then invite them to put on a second hat, another hat of seeing where can we see the connections between our different roles. So how can we value the role that you bring, honor it, name it, surface it, and see the connections between those roles? And the last thing I'll say, and we can dive deeper on any of these, is
Yeah.
Lakita, to your point, emotions are key. So when we in our book we talk about four big buckets of things to navigate these paradoxes, these both to enable the both and. One of them is about our mindsets and how we frame the questions that we ask and moving from the or questions
Mm.
to the and questions and sort of the head and the assumptions we make. But one big one is about our emotions and naming all of the anxieties that happen when we feel challenged or when we feel threatened by the other side. And what we talk about is the importance of naming those emotions to be able to, we say, find comfort in the discomfort. This is not easy. This is not comfortable. Can we hold that discomfort and still move forward and not let it stop us along the way? So I'll pause there
So
for a moment.
I
so
was
good. Yeah.
so
Go
many
ahead.
things. One of the things, just as you were talking about that emotions piece, going back to what you were saying about our identities, is like I think there's so many emotions that come up when our
Mm.
identities feel threatened, right?
Yeah.
In some way. Speaking of just like what's your role, and that can feel very threatening. And so being able to frame that in a we want to think about what we contribute separately, like separate, and then how are we going to connect so that it doesn't feel like an attack on someone's identity or role or what they do, but they're actually part of creating that solution and they get to bring their identity because it's valuable and we need to figure out how to connect. And that just felt so like important to me because I think when we can notice those emotions and how much they're connected to our identities, it can really help us take that pause that you talk
Hmm.
about in your book to like take the time to think through that both and piece.
And
Yeah.
here I think is where the work that you all do in these limiting beliefs, right? The extent to it, right? And those limiting beliefs are partially, our identities are fantastic to enable us to show up in the world, and they're detrimental, both and they are detrimental
Always.
in the ways that
Mhm.
they create barriers from us to be able to show up in new ways or to change or to shift along the way. So I have a colleague, as I'm writing a new book, I'm writing about a colleague who was just a fantastic physician. And she became incredibly intrigued by the possibility of working in administration and what it meant in a big hospital system to work in administration and see the possibility of working in population health and a broader impact. Well, if you're a physician who has gone through medical school and all of the training and you're surrounded by other physicians, that's selling out because that's not who you are. Your identity is being a physician. Your identity is not being an administrator, which totally limits the possibility that actually the best administrators of hospitals are physicians.
Because they
And
have
and so, but
experience.
noticing how, and for years and years and years, this role, both her commitment to herself in her role and this like social pressure from others around her of how they understood this role like really intensified or really limited that possibility of being able to hold, I am both an administrator and a doctor and can bring that together to do good in the world.
I love this because I love talking about limiting beliefs
Yeah.
and also just so we can address them, right? Because I think they do have this to your both and piece. There is a benefit, and a lot of times they can hold us back. It makes me think about skill development here as well. And you mentioned two things. You talked about leaders taking the opportunity to paint the vision, like what's our big goal. And
Yeah.
so one of the things we talk about at Co-Create Work is like the five components of culture, and the first one is shared purpose, right? That we
Yeah.
have to get really clear on that vision and purpose and make sure that it's connected for everyone in the organization. And then another thing that we use are tools like assessment. And we like to think about assessment differently, where it's not just about, you take an assessment and understand about you use it as an opportunity to understand the other person. So
Yeah.
then that can help us break through the role pieces. I wonder what other skills you would recommend that leaders, like a leader who's in an organization, a manager right now, and it's like, I don't even know where to start with this, right? We have the vision, we have some like self-knowledge, understanding your role and having empathy for the role of others. Are there any other tools and practices that people should look to develop as we're moving forward?
Gosh, for sure. I mean, those two for sure are huge. And you know, I was recently in a conversation with someone about AI, and what I found was a leader of an organization, and what I found was this intense pressure to
Mm,
have a point of view and a
mm,
solution.
mm,
And in part because it just feels like it's coming at us fast and furious, and we need to get on it quickly, whether we need to get on it strategically and know how to work we're going to do as an organization, or whether we need to get on it in terms of regulation and be able to, if we're going to how we're regulating, what we're regulating, how. And the truth is that there's so much we don't know. So can we hold that uncertainty long enough for the solutions to emerge? And what do we as a leader need to tell our organization so that we can here's part of the issue is that there's anxiety, to your point, fear. And one of the reasons that we sit in the either or is because either or means we've made a choice and we're moving forward. We feel anxious when there's uncertainty and we don't have clarity on a choice or on a point of view or on like clear ways to move forward. So, as a leader, this leader that I was talking to was feeling tremendous pressure both to have a solution because of all of the intensity of the strategy but also because the organization was demanding it.
yeah.
So, how can leaders both offer up clarity of what they know and sit and name and be okay with the uncertainty of what they don't know and what's going to emerge? Because that's real. That's real, and that creates the opportunity for learning. So,
Hmm.
and for listening and for engaging and for allowing new potential strategies to emerge because this stuff is not simple. Coming up
Hmm.
with a simple solution only shoots yourself in the foot for the fact that like new things will emerge along the way.
Hmm.
It makes me think about, and I don't know if it's a quote, or I'm sure it's a quote that I've heard around, like the highest form of intelligence is your ability to like change your mind with new data. And
Yeah.
how do we sit in that and hold that and not look like I'm not willing to make a decision or I'm
Hmm.
wishy-washy to your point that you were talking
Yeah.
politically, like flip-flopping. How do we set up those parameters for our teams, for our organizations, where that's part of like an expectation is like I feel like that would be so helpful to be able to do from a skill perspective, from an organizational perspective, just name this is how we operate as an organization. We're going to take what we know and do the best we can with what we know. And as we get more information, we may shift a little bit because we'll have more information. Does that feel like it would be helpful in this scenario? Like I just
Yeah.
thinking about tools and skills and what people can build.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the hardest things, and Lakita, this goes back to your question earlier about whether social media is ramping up the either or, because there's not a lot of nuance on social media. People
Yeah.
take sides very quickly. There's a lot of cancel culture. There's a lot of, if
Yeah.
you don't agree with me, I'm going all these things that create problematic behaviors for being able to hold uncertainty. The other place where I have a lot of empathy and don't want to be naive, I've wanted to enable sort of more nuance or more uh, uh, potential for people to hold uncertainty in the political realm.
Mm,
And what I know is that in the political realm, you both have to, like, you have to, the pressure to then think about your next election makes it really hard to be able to govern in a more nuanced and
mhm,
way across the aisle and with, being able to change your mind. Okay, so I think those are all real pressures. Here's one thing that I have seen that effective leaders have done when they are holding this kind of complexity or being able to lean into uncertainty where they're not making a very clear or a specific and certain decision. I think the first thing is to be transparent about the thinking process.
mm,
So, what's the process that we're going to go through to be able to answer the questions that we need to answer? Who are we going to consult? Who are we going to engage with? Who are we going to ask questions to? So that it's not a statement of indecision or a statement of, sort of wishy-washiness. It's a statement of holding open the possibilities and shows how we're going to move to the next level. So
yeah.
how do we be transparent about the process? How do we be transparent about the questions that we're asking? Sometimes leaders can assure their people by letting them know that they're asking really profound and thoughtful questions. How do we invite in responses from our people? One of the things that I think is really detrimental, and we've seen this in the research will show that when leaders will not ask questions of their company because they want to appear self-assured.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet what we find is that when leaders open up questions, here's what I'm curious about, and here's it actually and invite in reactions and responses, their people often see them as much more engaging and much more complex. This is, a little bit of the research around Brene Brown's work on vulnerability. The more vulnerable you are, the more approachable you are, the more connected you are. So I think that there are skills around being able to hold off the clarity and certainty and specificity by sharing process, by sharing, by sharing compelling questions, by sharing process along the way of what you are doing, by sharing where you have come to decisions and what decisions and strategies you have clarified,
Mm.
even as and noting that that might change as the situation and context changes. So I think people are really open to that kind of complexity.
I hear you saying there that there's a lot of power, I think is a theme through this conversation in being clear, right? And like saying up front, here's how I'm thinking about it. Here are the questions I have. Here's our approach. I would imagine that leaders, to your point, have tension within an organization that maybe if they're an executive leader to be seen at from someone who is higher than them, the CEO or someone like that, that you need to be um the black or white thinking, right? I know there's a big company here that one of their principles is like you are right a lot. So in an organization like that, how does one begin to do like some self difference in how they're putting their leadership brand forward or the way that they want to show like I'm just not going to work in that way.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to answer a question that you didn't just ask because as
Yeah.
you were talking about this, I'm thinking, some of the people listening to this might be senior leaders who are trying to convey clarity and certainty and
Yeah.
alignment and get all the people on board while at the same time being open to this changing reality and landscape and need to hold this
Yeah.
uncertainty and allow emergence. Some of the people might be people who are middle managers or even
Yeah.
entry level managers. And that too is a space where leaning into curiosity and deep questions. Your boss asks you to do X, Y, and Z. Naming and identifying the process of trying to figure out what you have done in that case and at the same time, what questions you are trying to answer, and also being able to hold, and here's where I want to bring it back to both and that it make a decision between X and Y and being able to say, look, here's what X is about. You're asking me to come up with a plan for, I don't know what people are being, struggling with. You're asking me to
Yeah.
come up with a plan for where we're going to take, our next marketing campaign. Here's one strategy A. Here's the benefits and detriments of it. Here's another strategy B. Here's the benefits and detriments of it. Here's how we can think about how strategy A and strategy B can work together effectively over time. That is a much more complex description for your leaders than I think we should just go with A. So
Mm.
it's
And
again about process. It's again about clarifying, specifying your process, clarifying and asking, really curious questions, being open to possibilities, but also inviting in that you're noticing and valuing different approaches, and then asking a deeper question about how they go together.
yeah, I think in this, everything that you've described, it reminds me a lot of this idea of like personal power, like the opportunity to say, I am going to take this approach and this is the way that I'm going to make a recommendation or think about this. I kind of won't be put in a box to the
Yeah.
both and thinking of it all.
Yeah.
And I think that that feels really freeing to me. I think we may have some people who listen and say, "Hey, I'm just not in that position of power to do that." That's something that for me sometimes feels like a limiting belief because I think we always have some authority. But I'm curious how you would respond if someone was to say, "Well, I don't have that level of power in the organization
Mm,
that I'm in."
mm. This, has come up so many times when I have done sessions for middle managers. It's one thing to talk with the managers who set the culture, to your
Yeah.
point, set the
Yeah,
vision,
yeah.
set the alignment. It's another thing when you feel like you are, when that has come down to when you are a recipient of those. Yeah. So what do you tell them?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think as you know, we one of the things that we believe really strongly is like personal transformation has to happen before an organization can transform. And so in that, get really clear on what your values and principles are, how they align with the organization, and begin to take that opportunity to explain, right? That I'm going to take an approach that is going to be more nuanced because I think it will get us here or move us forward. Sometimes we don't take that step because the perception is that idea will be shut down. So until you take that step and are shut down, I want you to do that, right? And if
Yeah,
you
I
are
love
shut
that.
down or you can't move forward, then it might be, hey, this organization or this space, this project is not the right one for me to work on, and I have to make some different decisions. But sometimes I find we don't do that before we ever get pushback because there's the appearance that we're going to receive pushback.
Yeah.
But when you talk about nuance and both and thinking, anytime I heard your descriptions, I was like, oh, that's a leader I will want to work with, right? Like, and so
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity for people listening to try that. I think sometimes there's the perception that it won't be welcomed, but if we do that, like if people read your book, if they do it with skill and with
Mm,
practice, I think we can get a lot further than what we think. That's my
yeah.
thoughts. Chloe,
I
do you
love
have a
that.
different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's so funny because I literally just had a conversation this morning with a client, and one of the things we were talking about was experimenting, right? Like
Mhm.
frame it as
Mm,
an experiment. So here, what
mm,
are we going to experiment with? How are you going to get data? What data are you looking for? What are you collecting as she's trying on some new approaches in her leadership, right? So very much in that space of like, you don't know until you actually do it. And I think sometimes for people that's so hard because of those limiting beliefs, because of fear, because of
mhm.
identity, because of all the things that we've been talking about. It can be really hard because it feels very risky. And I think framing it, for me, framing it with clients as this experiment, like you're not tied to it. You don't have to do this forever, but let's try it. Like,
Yeah.
let's try
Mhm.
it and see how it goes.
I love experimentation. We
Yeah.
talk about that as dynamics, as being able to sort of allow things to emerge, try serendipity, novelty. I want to add two more both ands to this question because I love this question of how do I sit within an organization where it feels like I don't have power to do the things that I think need to be done? And so there's it. in teaching, so my background is that, my PhD is in organizational behavior. I've been teaching leadership since, I came out of the PhD womb, if you will. I mean, there's been two kind of big both ands in teaching leadership for me that relate to what you've said. The first is that is thinking about power through both formal power and informal power. And I talk about it as big L leadership and little L leadership, but it goes back to like there's, models of power in 1956 from French and Raven. But the idea, like old research, the idea is that we tend to think of power as the person in the role in charge who gets to make the formal decision. So that's like big L leadership, your boss. But there are so many sources of power. And I know for some people, power is a bad word. Power meaning you have the structures and the resources to get stuff done and make influence and do stuff that have nothing to do with your formal title and role. All these informal sources of power. So you are more powerful in your organization if you have more information and data. If you are the starting employee that has been playing around with AI and knows all these apps or all of these tools or all of this insight, your boss is really going to want to know what you know. And that is a huge source of power to be able to make a difference. So knowledge is a source of power. And your ability to connect with people and, your sort of personality and charisma that you can get along well with people is a huge source of power that people need. Or your networks, the people that you know that you can connect with to have the resources to get stuff done that have to get done because you know this person and you can bring them in. That's a source of power. None of those have anything to do, or none of those are about the big L formal role of leadership. They're about the little L resources that you can cultivate to be able to get stuff done. So, and by the way, this is not an either or. It's
Yeah.
not either. So, and this is a great both and because the both and here is that if you are more junior and don't have big L leadership, the more that you can cultivate your little L leadership, you raise your hand to say, I'll do something, and you get it done well and you're reliable. You bring in your knowledge, whatever, the more that you move into big L leadership. And the more
Mhm.
that you have the big L leadership of the role, the more that you're able to cultivate all these other resources of little L leadership. They work together. I think that's a big both and in leadership.
Mhm.
By the way, the other one I was going to say, is that when it comes to this kind of work, also there's a tension between what I know and what I'm going to learn, how I
Mhm.
perform and how I'm going to learn. So if right now I am doing stuff that I am performing well, it makes me sort of hesitant to pause and learn and experiment because experimenting, Chloe, to your point, is about doing stuff fast and failing. And so there's
Mhm.
this performance failure tension. But here too is the both and because the more you can experiment and try and learn and fail fast and learn from your failures, the more effectively you're going to be able to perform over time.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, your performance declines. So we've got to make time for the learning and experimenting in order for us to keep performing. There's a big both and in that one too.
Mm.
That one, I feel like a lot of people get really stuck in that, and we see
Mhm.
careers stall because, oh,
Mhm.
I've done the thing I've been asked to do. Oh, I keep doing that. I'm really good at it. This is what I'm asked to do. And then you get kind of pigeonholed and you
Right.
never kind of move up, and your fear of experimenting grows, your fear of taking risk grows. But then you're in this place where you have to totally shift. So
Stagnant. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, or you're stuck,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I want to say, I mean, what this raises for me, and I think a really important point about holding these kinds of competing tensions, whether it's the little L leader and big L leader, learning and performing, or a leader who is focused on well-being and productivity. One of the things that I learned, this was actually the core of my dissertation. So early in my career, was that I went out to study. And the big learning was that you don't always have them both at all times. That's the bottom line. And here's what I mean by that. Um, I went out to study how leaders in a tech company innovated. That was what I was looking at in my dissertation. And a core tension that they were dealing with is that these leaders were introducing massive technological innovation, something akin to what AI would look like today.
Mm,
But they weren't get they the assumption is that they were going to move to the future and leave behind the past, but the past wasn't going to go away for like
mm,
20 years.
mm,
So they really had to hold on to the way they always do things and their existing world and all of that, and at the same time innovate. They had to hold both of these together.
mm,
And what I had assumed was that when I would go talk to these senior leaders, I would find that the ones that were committed to, they had this shared vision, overarching vision of holding both the past and the present, the old and the new, the existing world and the innovative world. We're going to come up with all of these great moments where these two worlds were going to collide and support each other. Like the both and in the way we call it in the book, we talk about it as the mule or the
mm.
creative
Yeah.
integration, like the ultimate win-win. And we call it the mule, by the way, because the metaphor is the mule is the oldest biological hybrid animal. It is the hybrid between a donkey and a horse, and it's, smarter than the donkey and stronger than the horse. You bring them together, you got the mule. Like this great win-win. And the truth is that when I looked at these senior leaders, they were able to find those great moments sometimes,
Mm,
but actually, most of the time, what they were doing was what we call, or the metaphor we use is tightrope walking, or we call it being consistently inconsistent, or oscillating, or micro shifting, or in my dissertation, I called it dynamic decision making. And here's what we mean by that, which is that in order to hold both, in their case, the old and the new, the existing product and the innovation, they were actually making choices to allocate their resources or to allocate their staff or to structure their organizations that sometimes focused on the old and sometimes focused on the new. So they
mm,
weren't stuck between the two of them. They weren't always finding this ideal integration. They were shifting between the two. But the important point was that they weren't over focusing on the innovation that they left the existing world behind, or over stuck in the existing world in inertia that they couldn't innovate. They were making these micro shifts of
mm.
resources, of strategies, of structures to allow them to move forward. And the metaphor of the tightrope walker is that you can imagine a person on a tightrope they're never fully balanced.
Mm,
They're
mm,
always balancing, meaning that they're sometimes shifting a little bit left and sometimes shifting a little bit right in order to move forward. So, importantly, sometimes in the both and world, we're making choices. You know, the biggest both and that people talk about is work life. It's not like every moment I'm finding this ideal work-life balance. Sometimes I'm home for dinner with my kids and sometimes I'm not. And sometimes, or it's not like every choice you're making as a leader is all about well-being. Sometimes you're going to lay down the gauntlet, get performance achieved, but you're making these sort of micro shifts so that you're able to hold both over a period of time. And that's an important component of being able to hold the both and.
I think that's so powerful. That's I'm like definitely folks take that away because that visual of a tightrope walker is like the adjustments constantly. So as we're getting close here to closing, I'm curious for that description, what type of mindset is
Yeah.
needed and how is that going to help is in this age of like AI? What is the mindset of the tightrope walker as they're walking from that old to new, which I think was just a perfect metaphor.
Yeah. I mean, just notice even with the tightrope walker, you're holding
Mm,
competing demands where on one hand you have a vision of where you're going, you're focused somewhere in the future, and you're constantly shifting in the moment. So
hmm
there's something powerful about the clarity and specificity and the ability to change and shift, the stability and change that you need both of those, so the future looking the other metaphor we like to use is imagine yourself on a rocky ship where there's all kinds of uncertainty or there's all
mm,
kinds of waves tossing you one way, tossing you the other. The way to feel more grounded is to look out into the distance, out at the horizon, which is stable to be able to hold the waves that move along in the moment. For leaders, that again goes back to having some kind of clarity in the future and at the same time allowing for that nuance in the moment. And again, this, to this mindset piece, we've done a whole lot of work on, and we on what it means to have what we call a paradox mindset. Hold the
Mhm.
yin yang, be able
Mhm.
to accommodate the the black sliver and the white sliver and bring them together. And if anybody wants, we have a paradox mindset scale that's available on our website. You can take
Oh, we
this
will share
assessment.
that.
Yeah.
But the,
Yeah.
the assessment essentially asks, how comfortable are you? How much do you experience and notice tensions, and how comfortable are you with holding those tensions and being able to look up and move beyond the either or into holding a both and in those tensions?
Mm, everything that I've heard from this conversation is like we definitely started the conversation to talk about artificial intelligence, but the capacity that you are having listeners think about, I think it's something that is going to serve them well, no matter what problem, obstacle, challenge that they're thinking about. So, our closing question was going to be, are you bullish or bearish on where we're headed with AI? And that is way too black and white.
Before
So where,
Lakita,
yeah,
sorry, before you get
yeah,
to the closing question,
yeah,
because I want to go there, but and I wanted to have it wrapped nicely. I
yeah.
just want to name like this future and past, like has been so
Mm,
helpful for me to think about also,
mm,
just because I think it's really going to be useful for leaders as they're thinking about AI and AI adoption.
Mhm.
And right? Like I can really effectively use some AI tools because I already have expertise. So I can take what AI is giving me and I've got that knowledge. So I've got the past, I've got the future. And it's really important for us to be thinking about how do we ensure that people still develop the skills they need while also using AI so we don't lose some of those skills. And I just wanted to name that because I feel like that is such a valuable thing to be thinking about is like how do we
mm.
hold that future with the past and not just go
Yeah.
we're off into the future, but being like we need both. So I just wanted to name that one and highlight it because
Mhm.
it's so helpful. Sorry, and
Mhm.
And
back to
Chloe,
you.
what I
Mhm.
also love about that is that AI is completely different than anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And it's completely similar to everything we've ever seen before. Meaning, like I think of it, we worked with this leader in Canada who talked about new ways with old things. How can we learn about all of these massive technological transitions that
Yes.
have completely upended our world and understand what happens so that we can apply that to AI?
Yeah.
And how can we ask the question about what's exceptional and different about AI and do both of those to help us navigate AI going forward?
Yes, I love that. So many, I think, just amazing tools and resources. So, as you think about AI in the future, the AI, humanity, work, where
Yeah.
are you optimistic and
Yeah.
where are you concerned?
I love everything about that. I mean, first of all, I want to just say that it is, meaning AI is here, so we
Mhm.
cannot again stick our heads in the sand. I am super optimistic that we are facing a significant amount of challenges in our world in terms of scope and size and grandeur and population and I think AI has the capacity to help us come up with solutions that can address some of our greatest pragmatic and physical challenges. And so I'm excited about how people will use AI to address some of our world's grand challenges around overpopulation, around food distribution, around and build play into that. Where I am worried is that, like any technology, the technology itself is neutral. How we use it is for good or for bad. If we want to enable it to be super creative for good, we have to be grappling with what kind of regulation do we need when people use it for bad. And so where I am worried or what I would really like to see is that we have more thoughtfulness collectively, probably politically, to understand what kind of regulation we need to target for good possibilities and minimize for bad possibilities.
So good. Thank you so much for being here, Wendy. It has been a pleasure. I have so many takeaways, as Chloe mentioned, like just so many notes, so much that I think that people can apply today, which is one of the biggest reasons that we wanted to have you join us. Tell us how people can find you, and is there
Mhm.
anything we can do to support you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say how grateful I am to the work that you both do and that Co-Create does to help leaders show up in this really challenging world with more complexity, and more collaboration and more connection. So thank you both.
Of course.
You
Thank
can
you.
find me online. You can find me most foremost at wendykSmith.com. But you can also, and that will lead you to LinkedIn and all the good places where Wendy Smith and Paradox usually brings me right up. So, and I would be so grateful. I mean, just so thrilled to hear people's reactions and thoughts and responses and curious what people are grappling with.
Questions. We will definitely get that out. And we encourage you to pick up Wendy's book as well, both
Yes.
and we're going to link to that and the paradox tool that you mentioned. Wendy, thank you for being here and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, guys.
We hope today's conversation gave you something to think about and, more importantly, something you can use. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love for you to share it with another leader, entrepreneur, or friend who might benefit from hearing it. And for additional resources, frameworks, and tools related to our topic, please be sure to subscribe to our newsletter at cocreatework.com. And of course, if you have any question you'd like us to explore in a future episode, we would love to do that. So please send it to podcast@cocreatework.com. As always, thank you for being here and thank you for your leadership.